Okay, Mark, welcome to the show. For anybody that doesn't know you and isn't aware of your work, could you tell us a bit about your background and how you first got interested in transactional analysis?
Okay, this is going back a long way now. This is going back almost 30 years. Um, Originally, like when I first started out, I was working in mental health, community mental health, doing a lot of um, basically going out into the community. And it was my job to deal primarily with people who were psychotic. And it was a bit of a novel project at the time. It was when back in the days when the big massive mental hospitals closed down, and so they booted out all these people who'd been in there for years into the community and expect them to be able to cope, and not many of them were able to do so. Um, and it was I had virtually no training. And, I was just sort of out there. It's pre-mobile phone days. I was turning up on people's doorsteps and saying, come on, get your coat on, we're going out. It's like the naivety of youth was probably a good thing, really. But I was always aware of, like, one day I'm probably going to say the wrong thing. And I was very aware that my skills were lacking. So I signed up and did a certificate in counselling skills. And about halfway through it, one of the tutors did a workshop on transactional analysis. And I spent most of the evening feeling a little bit slightly paranoid, because it was as if my entire life was being explained to me in front of me, like every single model. I was like, oh my God, oh my God. And that's really stayed with me. I can still remember that evening. I can still remember what it felt like to have all these concepts that just explain so much of what was going on. And that's really what sort of got me into TA. So following on from that, I trained as a counsellor. And then after I finished that, then I trained as a TA psychotherapist.
Brilliant, brilliant. So how would you describe TA to somebody that's never heard of it before? How would you...
Yeah. Do you want all the basic concepts and stuff? Do you want me to just go?
No, we'll get into that, but just as a brief sort of, an introduction to how would you describe it?
All right. TA is not just a psychotherapy; it's a sort of body of psychological theory, really, that's used in therapy, but it's also used in organizational development, in coaching settings, in educational development, and things like that. It's a sort of body of theory that helps people to understand what's going on the inside for them, their own internal process, and to make sense of that by thinking about their development, how they've grown up, what's influenced them, what messages they've picked up from the environment. But not only is it about looking at what goes on the inside, it's about what happens with people. And just some of the most inspiring concepts, I think, in TA are looking at interpersonal relationships. One of the things that I think is great about TA is that we use everyday language. Well, I say everyday language. It was everyday language in the 1960s when TA was developed. Some of it's a little bit clunky now, but it doesn't use long, fancy jargon. We just use simple, straightforward language to explain concepts. That's a really central principle in TA. We also use a lot of diagrams for things. We like to be able to diagram it. And so that what we do if we work in therapeutically in TA is we work with clients and we help them understand what's going on for them, make sense of it. And we develop a shared language for change.
Very interesting. And where does the name transactional analysis actually come from? Well, why the name TA?
Well, originally it was developed as a method of group psychotherapy. And it was about the transactional analysis was analyzing the transactions between people, or in other words, the communication between people. So that's where the name came from. So the idea that was that Eric Berner was the guy who first came up with TA. He identified that people operate from different positions, and that we can sort of like infer someone's internal process from how they communicate. And that the idea was that you could map out breaks and awkward points in communication and diagram them. So that's where it all started, was about the analysis of communication.
Interesting. So you mentioned that whenever you first discovered this around 27 years ago, that all these light bulbs went off and things clicked for you. I'm just curious, how has understanding TA and its sort of principles improved your own quality of life? Like, was there much of a difference in Mark pre-TA and post-TA?
Oh yes, very much so. One of the things that I love about TA, and I'm getting excited now, like me, what you can't tell is my feet are going like that. which is always a good sign. Is one of the great things about TA is that we use these everyday language concepts that you can use straight away. Like you can make sense of it, and it's accessible, and straight away you can think about how you can do something different. So one of the things that I did is I started becoming very aware of what was happening in relationships with people. I started to, think about how I could improve the relationships, about clarity and communication. It helped me become more assertive. I think it helped me become more caring. It helped me to ask for what I need, and rather than expecting other people to be able to mind read it. I really gained a lot from it. So, and that's one of the values and sort of real strengths of TA, is this ability to have like concepts that have got a real intuitive appeal that you can use straight away to make changes in your life.
I love that. I love that. Now, you're trained as an EMDR therapist as well, I believe.
Right.
I also wanted to ask, what, apart from, its accessibility, what would you say the benefits of TA are as compared with other forms of psychotherapy out there?
Okay, I mean, I'm sort of the view that a lot of therapies are pretty much equal, and so to me, the benefit of TA is if the concepts make sense to you, if they click for you, then that's the one to use. I think that whatever therapy you need to use is the one that makes sense, I suppose. What I think that TA's got a real advantage over is that it helps people to develop a sense of self-compassion for themselves. I mean, a lot of therapies do that, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that TA's got the monopoly on that. But what I think it does is it helps us to understand how we came to be who we are today. So we take a sort of developmental lens and look at what happened to someone and how has this shaped who you are right now. That's one of the things I think we're really good at. But it's not only that, it's also got a real interest in repetitive patterns. And so if people find that they're getting caught in scenarios with friends, with family members, with partners, where it's like, oh, here we go again, the same thing's happening over and over, that TA is really good at helping people to identify exactly what it is that's going on and to figure out how they can do something different.
Very interesting, very interesting. So what would you say the core elements of this approach, like what's it built upon? I read in the introduction to your book that there's elements of CBT here, but also there's existential psychotherapy elements as well, which I find is not something that's usually brought together under one umbrella, So what's the story there?
Okay, so the background of TA is Eric Berne was a psychoanalyst originally. So TA was intended at first to be an extension of psychoanalysis. What happened though is Eric Berne's application to join the San Francisco Institute of Psychoanalysis was rejected twice, and I think on the second time he just went, oh, screw this, I'm going to go and do my own thing. And actually that's when the real innovation started happening. So it's got that sort of understanding from psychodynamic and psychoanalytic thinking about how our past shapes who we are, and how that this past stuff is all sort of like kind of recorded in our unconscious, and how we operate and live that out on a day-to-day basis. So that's the sort of psychoanalytic bit. It was also developed during the 1960s when humanism was very much a big influence in the States, and this kind of view that human beings are in a continual process of growth and development and healing. And that's one of the core principles of TA, is that people, we believe that people are fundamentally good, and then anything that's a variation on that is due to what happened to them, which is very much an idea that we're starting to hear now within the whole mental health field. It's not what's wrong with you; it's what happened to you. What happened to you that led you to develop and become this person who we see right now. So TA was, we were there back in the 60s on this one. Eric Berne also reference Kierkegaard, the existentialist author, in some of his early works about these sort of core preoccupations around death, and about how we live our life and how we're going to make our life meaningful. And so the link with that was this idea of life script, or the sort of narrative that we have, that we use to explain who we are, how the world is, what other people are, how we're going to relate to each other, how it's all going to end up. So that's sort of woven in there. And one of the concepts that I'm guessing I'll probably talk about in a little while is that Eric Berne came with, is the idea of this adult ego state. So this is this kind of like rational, logical part of us. And one of the problems that he believed was going on was that people pick up these sort of irrational ways of thinking. And so some of the ways of working are pretty much identical to what we'd see in CBT. And what's interesting is that Eric Berne was developing TA, in California in the 1960s at pretty much the same time that Aaron Beck was developing cognitive therapy on the East Coast. So we're seeing these sort of parallel things happen. Interesting. Unfortunately, Eric Berne died in the early 70s, so I don't think he ever properly got to develop that side of things. But certainly a lot of TA people since have really picked up on this. So this is one of the things that I love about TA, is that you've got all these different lenses that you can view it from. And I think that one of its strengths as well is it's a framework for integration of different types of psychotherapy. So you can take most types of psychotherapy and bring them into it. So you've already mentioned EMDR. So I combine the two in my work regularly.
Interesting. So I know you've done a lot of work on looking at TA and how it can help with trauma, for example. In what situations is this approach particularly effective?
Okay, so it certainly is really useful for trauma. It's quite interesting that a lot, the whole field of trauma therapy over the past couple of years has got very excited about talking about parts, and the idea is that that people sort of fragment under extreme trauma, particularly in childhood, and that they sort of form like little separate parts of themselves. I mean, we all have different parts. We all manifest different parts of ourselves in different situations. I'm not the same person I am with my friends as I am with my mum, and that's just how it should be. It doesn't mean that they're fake. It just means that they're different facets of who I am. And that the idea is that in trauma, that parts of us become hurt and sort of hidden away, and it's a sort of protective thing. TA's been talking about parts again since the 1960s. So we've been doing this. And I look at some of the latest trauma manuals and how they're working, and it's like kind of what I think we used to call inner child work. Well, that's a concept that TA came up with. We've been doing this stuff for years. So this development of self-compassion, sort of like, for example, looking at yourself, imagining yourself as that 9-year-old boy who was hurt, and having some kind of dialogue with him and saying, hey, you know what, you're going to be okay. This is the stuff we see in trauma therapy books now, and said, we've been doing this for a long time. So TA, I think, is really useful at healing that sort of healing childhood trauma. My own research was looking at the effectiveness of TA for depression, and it works for that too. There is a number of people have looked at TA for anxiety and found that it has comparable effectiveness with other therapies. So these are the areas that we know that we've got some research evidence to show that it's helpful for, or where we can look at other research and say, well, we're doing the same thing. So those are the most obvious ones. The other area where I'd say that TA is really, really helpful is helping people develop their relationships and improve their relationships. I think we do really, really well on that.
Brilliant. And I suppose that really leads me into the next question. For such an effective approach that has such widespread application, why hasn't this been more widely adopted in the field? Like we're for the past 4 years, we're all making psychology more accessible, and we've explored all these different types of therapy. And I'm only really discovering this now, and I'm thinking, why is this not more widely out there? So why not?
I think that one of the reasons for that is that TA has always been a little bit on the fringe. That we think about like Eric Berne's story and how he was sort of like took a step away from psychoanalysis and was like in this sort of radical fringe in San Francisco. And I think that TA draws in a lot of people who are outsiders, if I'm honest. And also one of the other things is that, TA kind of like likes to carve its own way on things. We're not that always that keen on orthodoxy. So because of that, I think that what it has meant is that historically that TA practitioners have not necessarily worked in universities and places like that. And so because of that, we've been a little bit slow on the uptake in developing research. And really, all the changes that we're seeing in the whole field of psychotherapy, I think over the past few years are being driven by research. So certain therapies such as CBT, fair play to them. They've done the research, they've been doing it for years, and they've built up so much research that now it's really widely accepted and talked about. In TA, we were a bit slow on that one. And I said, I think that's just about historical developments of it. And so I think that's partly why we're sort of like not as out there as maybe we should be, because I think we've got some really great things to offer.
Interesting. I wonder, is that sort of like a chicken and the egg problem? Because people that are maybe drawn to CBT are more that sort of way of thinking anyway. Do you know what I mean? Very logical.
Yeah.
And the transactional analysis might be a bit more out there, as you say.
Absolutely agree.
So yeah, let's start talking about, I suppose, the core concepts and this model of we've all got three people inside of us. Could you maybe tell us about what those three people are and maybe provide a brief sort of overview of each, like an introduction?
Okay, so there are two main concepts that are at the heart of TA. One is ego states and one is life scripts. So I'll get that in so I can come on to the life scripts one. Ego states is this idea that each person has kind of like, you can kind of subdivide their personality into three different parts: parent, adult, and child. That's the basics of it. It's got an intuitive appeal. We all had a childhood. We all have a child self. We all remember what it was like for us as a child. We all remember what it was like was growing up. We all had a particular set of experiences, but we also all had parents. Some people might not have great ones, but they nevertheless had them. But the parent ego state is like a sort of collection of all the messages and everything that we picked up from the outside. So not just parents, school teachers, older siblings, relatives, nans, aunts, uncles, religious leaders, society and culture as a whole. Anything that's come from outside, we carry around with us. And this is really quite important because I think this is the source of a lot of the shitty things that goes on in people's heads. When people have this idea that they're not good enough or they don't look a certain way, or people when they're giving themselves a hard time, that in TA, we almost see that like the parent ego state is giving their child a bit of a kicking. So that's how we sort of understand self-criticism. The other ego state I've not mentioned yet, which I probably should have done, is the adult ego state. I'm doing these bit like this because in TA we draw them as three stacked circles. So I'm kind of like visually doing it in the air in between us. So the adult ego state is the part of us that's logical, rational, but also is here and now. So it's very much centered in the here and now. It's present centered. It's right now, the conversation we're having right now, we're applying thought, we're thinking about it, what we're saying, we're trying to make sense of stuff. So that's the adult ego state. So we've got the child, which is a collection of all our past experiences, all our history, including the triumphs and pains of that, all those things that we picked up about ourselves as a kid, like, I've got this strong message that I'm rubbish at maths. Why is that? Am I really rubbish at maths? Or is it just that I wasn't really taught in a way that suited me? I don't know, but I carry this belief with me everywhere I go. And, it's like I'm in a situation where I have to like do some very basic mental arithmetic. Oh, no, I can't do that. Does that kind of make sense to you? I mean, it's a sort of like simple, light-hearted example. I could give you plenty of examples on this. So, and like the parent ego state, a lot of us have got that. I can understand what I mean when you say, those times when you open your mouth and your mother comes out.
Yeah.
And like that's what your parent ego state is. I can tell you now that if I'm cross, then I turn into my nan. Proper turn into, if I'm really cross, I turn into my nan, and my accent changes. Suddenly here I've got a really strong Sheffield accent that I kind of lost a little bit over the years because I've moved around the place. But yeah, so if I'm cross, turn into my nan, and even use some of the same phrases that she uses, some of the same gestures. My finger will be going like this. That's just pure parent ego state.
It's so interesting. And if you think about it, in your early years, you're literally just a sponge, just
Totally,
observing everything that's going on around you. And
totally.
of course, you're going to internalize that and embody that, and that's
I
so
mean,
powerful.
you look at like a, David Attenborough program and look at nature programs, birds and lots of animals might only have like a few days with their parents, and yet they pick up and repeat those behaviors and, repeat them to their own kids.
100%.
So it's a survival mechanism, is to have this kind of imprinting mechanism where we learn through observation and through inference. Now, another thing as well is that humans are social creatures, and we've got to hold this right in the heart of it. It's all really about survival, and one of the ways that we ensure survival is by making ourselves acceptable to others. And one of the ways that we do this is by making inferences about what they want from us.
Mm.
But of course, I mean, this is attachment theory, like John Bowlby, that have really taken this idea that it's better for a child to believe that they're bad than for them to believe that their parents are bad. Because if they believe their parents are bad, then they've got nothing. They've got no safety, no protection. And in TA, we really take this and we think about the vulnerability of the child, and how a child has got this sort of a view of the world that's quite egocentric, because they don't have the sort of insight and knowledge and capacity to think about outside themselves. So, if a kid's being told off by their mum because their mum's not in a great mood, and then they see their mum and dad arguing, then the kids might likely to think, they're doing that because I've been naughty. When actually maybe mum was grumpy because there was something going on between her and dad. Does it make sense to you?
Totally, totally. And we develop at a young age, we develop strategies and patterns to sort of, I suppose, navigate the really complex sort of family dynamic, I suppose.
For
And
sure.
then at the time they're adaptive, but we just keep repeating them through our life. And as we get older, they become maladaptive and can harm the rest of our relationships.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about there leads me on to the sort of next tier concept of life script. So the idea is that, when we're born without a handbook of what all this is about, which I suppose links to the sort of existential bit, that we have to make meaning of it. We have to understand, what does a person like me do in a world like this with people like them? And it's all about meaning. And so what we do, we know that from birth, infants are drawing conclusions and it's all about prediction, really. It's all about the ability to predict things, because that allows us to survive. If we know what's going on, we can figure out what to do next. And so, we're learning, am I worthy of being looked after? If I cry, will someone come? If I'm hungry, will someone come? And, if they don't, what happens over a period of time? Do we stop being hungry? Do we stop being bothered? Do we cry louder? So what happens is people develop these sort of like adaptive strategies, as you've highlighted, to kind of try and get the environment to meet their needs or as they think it. But also they're drawing conclusions about themselves and about other people. Are other people to be trusted? Will other people be there for me? Are other people kind? Or will the people trick me? This kind of stuff. What about myself? Am I worthwhile? Am I inadequate? That's a really big one that a lot of people feel. Am I lovable? Um, you know, I mean, one of the things that I'm really aware of as I'm saying all this is, and the thing is, this is not just parents, but like school teachers. I have lost count of the number of people who've had like blocks in their adult life, all because of some things that a school teacher said to them that really defined their sense of self-esteem growing up. So, we sort of start getting a sense about ourselves and other people. And the idea is that we develop this sort of explanatory framework called life script. That again, like you say, just gets repeated and carried forward into everyday life. Now, the thing about life script is that what it does is it shapes how we perceive things. And it also shapes how we interpret things. But, it becomes a kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you see what I mean. It's like, if I believe that the world is bad and other people can't be trusted, then if I'm watching the news and see, like there's some war going on somewhere, I'm going to see people are bad. Or, it's like if my phone gets stolen, then I will see other people can't be trusted. But I can forget about all the other half a dozen times I left my phone somewhere and somebody chased me down the street and said, "Excuse me, you've left your phone." Do you see what I mean? It's about what do we pay attention to? What do we notice? How do we perceive reality? Do we interpret it right? What do we remember as well? It's like with depression and anxiety, what they do is they put a real negative slant on everything. So when people are depressed or anxious, that what this is the sort of pessimistic side of things, oh, it's all going to go terrible. It's all going to go pear-shaped. It's all going to be horrible. And so then that sort of puts people in a sort of negative frame of mind before they go somewhere or do something. That then means that, if there's the slightest problem with it, then they'll reinterpret it in that way, if that makes sense. Like a lot of people overthink stuff. You've had a conversation with your friend, you were talking about something, your friend's looking out the window and seemed a bit disengaged. So we go away from it and you think, I've upset them, or they're not interested in me. They don't really like me anyway. As actually, it might be that our friend is thinking about the fact that there's a load of stuff going on at work, and they're worried that they might lose their job, or maybe they had a fight with their partner, or maybe their kids are, have got something going on with them, or it can be any number of things. Maybe they've got a bad back, But that what we do is that we tell a story about what happens, and that's going to be filtered through our experience and through our expectations of the world. And then what we remember afterwards is colored by this. I mean, all of this sort of stuff is backed up by psychology research. There's tons of research that shows about cognitive biases and so on, and state dependent memory and all of this kind of stuff. So, these sorts of ideas that we're talking about in TA are not fringe things. They're not things that are out there. They're things that are supported by psychological science.
It's such an unfortunate aspect of the human brain that you have this, this concept of life scripts, but then you pair that with something like confirmation bias, and
exactly.
You go through your whole life trying to reinforce beliefs that you picked up from such a young age, and every experience is sort of an opportunity to reinforce that belief, whether it's good or bad.
It sucks, doesn't it? It sucks. But again, it's like we've got to think about this. I mean, these things have got an evolutionary advantage, haven't they? In some ways, I mean, they must have. It's like negativity, as I often explain to clients. Like, we have a negativity bias, right? And if we cast our mind back to 700,000 years ago, when we were all running around on the Rift Valley in Africa, it was a really good idea to have a negativity bias because it kept us alive. Our ancestors that noticed the bad stuff survived. The ones that didn't got eaten by the lion or whatever, or bitten by the snake or poisoned by the berries. The ones who paid attention to this stuff, they survived. So we've kind of like got our ancestors to thank for the fact that we're all a little bit neurotic and prone to anxiety. But the thing is that brains don't like to do very much. Again, we know this from neuroscience. Brains like to do as little as possible. It's energy conservation, again, which is all about survival. And so that what we do is that we sort of interpret things in a way that fits our predictions. Again, this is a really well-established phenomenon. But again, if your prediction is that you're worthless, other people are better than you, other people are not to be trusted, other people don't care for you anyway, and the world's a bad place, then that's how you're going to see things. And within TA, we also say that what you might do is that then might lead you into ways of being that elicit that from other people. Like a classic one of that is like people if people are suspicious of others, a little bit paranoid or something like that. You go into a social situation, you feel suspicious towards other people, then you're going to keep them at a distance and perhaps be a bit cold. Well, then other people are going to be a bit cold and distant back towards you, and maybe even a little bit hostile. So you can go away and go, see, I knew they didn't like me anyway. It's like how we behave can draw things out. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to this, but certainly, I think most of us know if you're nice to people, then generally they'll be nice back. Exceptions, yes. So, what we are and what we expect can really elicit certain patterns of behavior back from other people and change the interaction.
100%. And so in your TED talk, Mark, which is well worth a watch for anybody that's watched this interview, you outlined 7 cognitive biases. And I think one that really jumps to mind for me that could save so much unnecessary suffering in your life is this idea of a fundamental attribution error. And we assume malice on the behalf of other people when often it might just be something else, So something I think that can prevent a huge amount of that is just giving people the benefit of the doubt when they do something wrong, that they're not trying to hurt you or harm you. It's just that they might have forgot, or they might be busy or whatever.
Absolutely, absolutely. I absolutely agree with everything that you've said there. Yeah, I reckon that probably about 90%, this is not a scientific estimate, this is just a sort of a guess, about 90% of upset between people is completely unintentional. The person didn't intend us to hurt. I mean, we've all done it, haven't we? I can think of probably times within the last, I don't know, within the last week, where I've done something to upset my husband or a friend, or I don't mean to, but we all behave in ways. Sometimes we say things in a way that is perhaps a little bit clumsy, or we don't think about it, or we don't return a call or something like that. We didn't mean somebody to be offended or hurt, but they were. Now, in that situation, we're often a bit surprised by that, aren't we? Well, why are you crossing me? I didn't mean it like that. And what's happened in that situation is that the other person's interpreted our actions as hostile or intentional somehow. But of course, it works the other way around as well. How many times do we get upset or, get all spun out about something someone's done and take it really personally, when the chances are it's probably got nothing to do with us anyway. If somebody's grumpy, is it because they're pissed off with me, or is it just because the traffic was bad? Choose.
100%. So, obviously these life scripts that we all have and we all carry, they have a massive effect on our quality of life. And I think you mentioned in your talk as well about how our narratives sort of have a massive impact on our mental health as well. How can someone recognize what they're like? How might a TA therapist help somebody recognize what their life scripts are? That's obviously the first step to changing them. But how do you first recognize what these might be? How do they show up?
Okay, so one of the things that we're doing in TA therapy is we're kind of listening to the music behind the words, if you understand what I mean, is that we're making inferences about what implicit conclusions someone might have come to about themselves. It's like, okay, so what I'm seeing, what you're telling me about is this particular situation that you keep getting caught into. So what beliefs might lead someone to behave in that way? Now, when we say beliefs, it's I think a better phrase to use is kind of implicit conclusions. Is that, because I don't think these are necessarily consciously thought through at the time. It's just that we infer, we come to a conclusion about ourselves and other people when we're kids, often without any kind of thought at all. So we're kind of looking at that. We'll talk with people about their history. We'll ask them, what happened to you? Tell us, just talk us through some of your life story. And then we can kind of, talk them about the specific incidents maybe and go, okay, so what did you learn there? Another thing that we sometimes do in TA is we ask people to, as we'd say, listen to the voices in their head. Now, we're not talking about some kind of like psychotic hallucination. What we're really talking about here is internal dialogue or thought process. And we try and get people to externalize it. That's one of the great things about the parent-adult-child model, is I think that it gives us a framework that helps people to put their internal dialogue or whatever garbage is going around in their head out there and think about it and start separating it out. Thinking about, what am I thinking? How am I responding to that? If we go into, a situation where we're nervous and we tell ourselves that this is just going to go terrible, I don't know, so you have a presentation to do at work or something, and you're really nervous about it, and you're going to make a fool of yourself, then you're going to get more and more psyched up about it and more nervous about it. And when people are nervous, their throat gets dry. Mine does when I'm talking a lot anyway and getting excited about stuff. Then the throat gets dry and then they stumble over their words, and then they think everybody's looking at them. People are looking at them, but of course people are probably thinking, oh, it's okay, this is really interesting. But we try to help people like think about, what is it that's going on for you at that moment? Everybody's looking at me. Everybody thinks I'm stupid. Everybody thinks I'm a failure. Yeah, and I go to the bottom of the garden and eat worms, that kind of thing. I don't know if I'm answering your question now, whether I've just gone on some other side tangent. But yeah, so what we do is we'll help people talk about these examples, experiences that they're having, and we try and draw out these sort of implicit things that are going on, the music beneath the content, if you like. And then what we'll also help people do again is look at their development and try and figure out where it came from. Now, sometimes people say, well, can you actually be that certain? Well, no, of course we can't. But, what we're doing in TA, and I think in a lot of psychotherapy, is that we help someone construct an explanation that works for them. And sometimes it's not necessary for us to do some sort of like forensic historical deconstruction of things and say, it was exactly at 27 minutes past 5 on the 14th of April in 1987 that you decided this. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. We're talking more about generalized conclusions that people might come to, if that makes sense. So that's partly how we do it. Also, we're really interested in helping people to look at what goes on between them and other people. So, this idea that people repeat and replay their past is not a new one. Freud and the psychoanalysts were thinking about this years ago. And in TA, we've kind of found ways of operationalizing this and helping people to look at these repetitive patterns that go on between them and other people. So can I introduce you to a really simple one now?
Yeah, please do.
So there's one model that is used a lot, and it's called the drama triangle. Okay. So it's a way of mapping out what happens when people get caught up in a drama with each other. So it's got 3 points. I'm going to kind of draw them in the air. Persecutor, rescuer, persecutor, and victim. There we go. I knew I'd get there, and then I was trying to reverse it round. So it's this idea. This was one of those absolute light bulb epiphany moments for me when I was doing the training. My mouth was like on the floor, I swear. So the idea is that when stuff's happening between people, that they sometimes adopt a particular role. Now, for me, I was often in the rescuer role. I'd like try and do things for other people. This was one of the things I did, like a compulsive helper, and try and do things for people that they could do for themselves. Then what would sometimes happen, I'm thinking of one friend in particular who I was always like jumping to their aid without being asked. That's a crucial thing in this, is I was doing stuff for them. And then when they get pissed off for me interfering and they'd start persecuting, then I'd go into a victim place and feel really hard done by and misunderstood.
Okay.
We see this all the time. For folks who are watching this, just Google the drama triangle, have a look at it. And, if you want to watch, I know, something on TV, a drama, a soap or something like that, or even one of the reality shows, you'll just see it happening in front of you. So this is one of the things that we use, is that we listen out for these patterns that people get into and try and help them understand what's going on in their relationships and then make different choices. So for example, people, a really common one is for people to get caught up in these family, pointless arguments where one family member phones up and starts, complaining about another one. So you say, oh yes, that's terrible. And then the word gets back to the other person. Then they're phoned up and they're pissed off with you because you said this. This sort of scenario is really, really common. And in TA, we'd say that, okay, so let's have a look at the drama triangle and what's going on. What's your part in this? What part are you playing? How are you contributing to this? And what can you do differently to step out of it? Because that's another thing in TA, is we're not that keen on this idea that people necessarily are being sort of passive in their relationships. Now, obviously, again, there are exceptions to that. People are abused or treated really badly. But what we'll often look at is, what are you doing in this situation? So, sometimes when people are being, let's take example, people are being passive, it's like, well, you're not being assertive. So that's your contribution to this. It's like, if people treat you badly if you allow them to, or I think Eleanor Roosevelt said, if you don't want people to stand on you, then get up off the floor. I accept it's not always as simple as that. power structures and privilege and all the rest of it can get in the way. But generally speaking, as an idea about self-empowerment and taking back responsibility, which very much links with the existentialist idea about freedom and responsibility, then TA is really keen on that.
Interesting. Okay, so it seems that it's one of the most effective approaches out there for, I suppose, detecting these broad underlying patterns of our behavior in life and sort of, I suppose, articulating those and becoming conscious of those. So once you are conscious of these patterns and you know that you're doing this for a certain reason, that's great to know. But how then do we move from actually knowing it to actually changing the script, to one that's more empowering and actually adaptive in your current situation?
Okay, good question. I mean, some people would say that you never properly get rid of them. You just get better at them. They just get more, more subtly. The sort of patterns that you get caught in with people. Yeah, they're not as high stakes. So, I mean, one thing that happened to me when I was really getting stuck into TAs, I really evaluated all of my relationships, all my friendships, and started thinking, this is not good for me. What do I get out of this? If I want, I'm always the one helping, but what happens when I want help? Oh, there's nobody there. So if you take this idea about the compulsive rescuer, I don't do it compulsively now, but I get paid for it. So it's like about taking something that maybe is something that we've given and finding a way to use it constructively, if that makes sense.
No, totally.
And, I don't want to let go of being a caring person. I think it's really quite good. And I think that, we need lots of people like that, but maybe not people who are doing it at their own expense, people who are doing it in a way that's harmful or damaging to them. So it's about being, developing that capacity to balance it out with self-care. So I think that what TA can help us do is develop more options. It's not necessarily about taking something away from us, but it's about developing options and choices. Now, some people would also, sometimes it is about helping people change things. One of the most amazing things that happens to me in my work as a psychotherapist is when people regain their sense of self-worth. When people say, do you know what? I am valuable. I am worthwhile. And magic happens then. And sometimes people say things like that, and it's like they've never felt that before. That one of the most wonderful things in my job is just watching that process of transformation. And you mentioned trauma earlier on, and one, I do a lot of heavy trauma work, like really, really heavy stuff. It's almost like it's the more extreme it is, the more people are likely to come to me. That's fine. I can deal with that. And something really profound happens in it. And people sometimes said to me, like, how can you listen to these stories? How can you listen to these stories of child abuse and of torture? It's one of the things I do. And the thing that gets me through it is hearing about the tenacity of the human spirit.
True.
And how, that people, it can get better. Really, people can heal, people can recover. That hear these horrific stories, and it's like, oh my God, that happened to you, and you're still alive. You've survived that. Do you know how strong you are? It's incredible to witness this, and when people have that truth, that reality reflected back to them, and they start to see it, then magic things happen. It absolutely is a blessing. I personally think I've got the best job in the world. It's really powerful stuff, and it never ceases to make me feel humble.
That's incredible. So another big concept in TA is this idea of the basic life positions, the 4 basic life positions. Could you maybe run us through what they are as well and why they're important?
Sure. So this goes right back to the stuff I was talking about very, very early development in childhood. This also links with attachment theory and the internal working model, if you're familiar with that concept. But basically, life positions, it's about answering the question, am I okay or am I not okay? Or in other words, am I good or bad? Am I worthwhile or not? So it's, am I okay? Yeah, or not okay? And what about you? Are you okay or not okay? So if we've talked about this I'm okay or not okay, you're okay or you're not okay. We've got 4 different combinations of that. And the idea is that this sort of forms a sort of basic orientation to how people experience themselves and experience other people, if that makes sense. Now, the idea in TA is that the healthy, productive, constructive option is for people to develop a sense of I'm okay and you're okay. And we use that in TA to guide how we should relate to other people, how we should communicate, how we should structure our relationships, in work, in school, in our families, and so on. It's about treating ourselves and other people with equal respect. I think that's the key thing. It's not about putting the other person before us, but it's not about putting ourselves before the other person. It's about we are equals in this. I'm okay and you're okay. Now, what often we see in therapy is, particularly again with people who like depression and anxiety, is a sense that I'm not okay, but you are. Other people are better than me. Other people have got all this sorted. Other people have got all this. I mean, it's incredible the stuff that the ideas that people get in their head about others. It's like somebody might be thinking they're the only person who feels nervous when actually they don't realize that everybody else has got this stuff going on. They just hide it. And of course they can't see that you've got it going on. So that's the I'm not okay. You are. Equally, we can also look down on people, and you can take a stance of I'm okay and you're not. We often see that a lot in some of the sort of should we say more unsavory elements of the media, when they sort of demonize other people. We've seen it a lot at the minute, with the talking some of the sort of polarized language that's going on about migrants, as if they're the threat to society. We're all okay, but they're not. We see in any of these kind of positions where people are othering someone else. And of course, then there's a despairing position, which is quite tempting sometimes, is this sense of I'm not okay and neither are you. It's all shit. It's all shit. The world's all terrible. That's a sort of real despairing position. But as I was saying, TA is that actually the sense that our birthright is a sense of recognizing our fundamental okayness. I like this word okayness because it's not saying that everything's great, everything's hunky dory. It's just okay. It's good enough, to use language that's used used by Winnicott. Good enough. That's all we need to be, is good enough. Oh, I'm okay and you are. And let's treat it like that. Let's treat each other like we're okay. And it's all going to work out okay in the end.
I love that. So you could almost say the goal of this approach is to get people to that sense of I'm basically okay and you're basically okay as well. And yeah. I think as well, something that came to mind whenever you were talking there was, another thing from your TED talk. Just thinking about it, that's an incredibly useful, 14 or 15 minutes worth watching. Another thing you bring up is this idea that, essentially we all feel ourselves to be the center of the universe, right? And that's our sensation of life. But I think life goes 100% more smoother for you whenever you just realize that everybody is at the center of the universe for them. Just have that in your mind. You feel anxious.
Ain't all about you.
Exactly. And that takes the attention out of yourself and puts it on other people. And then you don't feel anxious then, which is the paradox of it,
Absolutely.
So just to sort of, I suppose, wrap up, what was the other thing I was going to ask? So for this particular summit, we're asking each person we interview for 3 books they recommend that every therapist should read. When I ask you that question, what books come to mind, Mark?
You're going to expect me to answer this now, aren't you?
On the spot.
I'm going to want to give you like about 200 titles on this one. Okay. I was going to link back to existentialism here now. Like I think one book that everybody should read, I'm using that word should very loosely because I hate it when people tell me you should, is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I think that's one of the most profound things that's ever written. It's deeply distressing in the first half of it when he's talking about his experience as a concentration camp, and profoundly liberating when he talks about how we look for meaning. So that's what I'd say for everybody. I'd say for psychotherapists or people in the mental health field, I'd say Irving Yalom's Existential Psychotherapy. That was a total game changer for me in terms of thinking about, what goes on for people, and this sort of like deeper level of just accepting the human condition. I suppose I ought to probably mention a TA book, didn't I? Although I'm a bit unsure about which one to go for on that. I could say my own, but that'd be a bit much, wouldn't it, really? Oh, I tell you what, as well, amazing one is Louis Cozolino's The Neuroscience of Psychotherapy.
Okay.
Turn it back to the brain, because it is all about the brain ultimately, and how the brain operates, and how, this idea about neuroplasticity and how our brain's constantly rewiring, which is based on fact. And this sort of really links with what we're talking about in psychotherapy, that people can change. And within humanistic therapy, that people can make things better, in humanistic approaches, we say that everybody has this urge towards growth and healing and making things better. And we see that's exactly what happens in this concept of neuroplasticity, that we can utilize and harness this positive force. So yeah, Louis Cozolino's Neuroscience of Psychotherapy would be another one.
No, that's three, Mark. That's three. Viktor Frankl, Irvin Yalom, and Luke.
There you go. That'll do. I've done it then.
That's three of the heavyweights in the field.
You know that what's going to happen though is most of the rest of the evening now, I'm going to sit and go, oh no, I should have said this one. I'll probably think about dozens, but that'll do for starters, I guess.
100%, 100%. Well, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today and learn a bit more about TA and your work and the incredible work that you're doing. Your own book, where can people get it online? You've got a couple of books written, is that right?
Yeah, I've done two. I wrote a book that's a sort of intermediate textbook on transactional analysis. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but the second edition is coming out soon, so don't buy the first one if you want to get it. It's called Transactional Analysis: 100 Key Points and Techniques. And I wrote a book called Transactional Analysis for Depression. I'm not working on the second edition of that though. So that's a treatment manual. That's sort of like for practitioners to get a sense about how they could maybe use TA in practice, and it's based on the research I did for my PhD.
Fantastic. Right. Well, I'll let you go. It's been an absolute delight to speak with you, and I wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you.